Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be working on something a little bit different and that I don't see much of in the Tumbler community or in tutorials, and that is how to apply dried flowers to an epoxy tumbler. So let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. I'm using a ton of different whites for this design. First one is Bougie from Peachy Glitters. Second is Sass Crafts Winter's Breath. The next one is Louisiana Lace from Nola's and Anastasia from Olive's Outlet. The fifth and sixth, I'm using That Good Ice from Feather Bear Bling and Chunky Parabatai from Peachy. I did not use White and Nerdy from Olive's Outlet, but I did end up using Luxe. And then I've got Lace from Chase Rae and Upper Class from Chase Rae. And then Neve as a very fine cut fill in to go over once everything's laid down. So on this 32 ounce plump from the Tipsy Magnolia, we're going to start out with a good layer of epoxy on this because we're going to layer our glitters and use a lot of chunkies. We want to use a little bit more epoxy than normal, just so everything lays flat. We have a chance to build glitter and kind of refine that blend. Not that it's really going to be in your face in the end because it's covered up by florals obviously and micas, but we don't want harsh lines, especially if you're using something other than white. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay down the chunkiest glitters first, and I'm just laying them at kind of an angle. However you want to angle this, it doesn't matter which way you do it. It's just preference for me. I'm left-handed, so it's easier for me to hold things in the left hand and spin it and then just kind of shake with my right hand. But I'm just going to go in, like I said, chunkiest first and kind of lay them where I see fit. All of the opals kind of shift different colors, so I tried to put coordinating colors next to each other. And in hindsight, I would not have used Lace from Chase Rae. It pulled way too yellow for my taste. You can't tell in the end that it's there because I did a pretty decent job of covering that up, both with other glitters and other micas and with the florals. So not a huge deal, but if you're replicating this, I would not recommend using that. That's probably going to be something used for more of an ivory based kind of a design. So once I've got all of those chunky glitters laid down, I'm going to go in with the fine cuts, which are Luxe and Neve from Peachy Glitters. And this is just going to fill in any spaces where you see the base of the tumbler, where it's spray paint. We don't want any of that to show through, so I'm just going to go pretty heavy-handed and fill in those areas with Luxe and then go back over it with Neve just to make sure there's no empty spaces. And then in addition to that, we are covering all of our bases here. I'm just going to take all of this cast off glitter and mix it into a cup, recover that entire tumbler with that just to make sure there are zero white spaces. We don't want anything not showing glitter and showing paint through. So once that's all coated, I'm going to tap off any excess, take my printer paper, and just use it very gently to rub around the tumbler just to make sure everything is smushed down flat. We want to be very proactive in this design because we are going to have quite a few coats of epoxy just because of the nature of the design. So we want to be sure that the pokey glitter bits are not adding additional coats of epoxy to what's already going to be needed to cover up those flowers and what we're going to have to add into the micas. So go ahead and smush that flat. Let that sit on your drying rack to, I would say, probably overnight dry. If you're using a fast set, just a couple of hours. And then we're gonna go in with a coat of epoxy, let that cure, and then where we're at right now is we're needing a second coat of epoxy. So right now I've got one coat of epoxy cured on my tumbler, and then in addition to that, I've put a thin coat of epoxy on the tumbler spinning, and we're going to put these micas over it. So I'm going in with probably about 3 milliliters maybe of epoxy in my mica mixtures here. I've got Woods Goodies, just regular micas. I've got some of their peacock micas. I've got some of their flakes and I've got some luster dust from Diamonds and Dust. You don't need much. 1 scoop of the flakes or the micas is plenty. You're not going to use very much. A little goes a long way with these micas. If you used them in the past, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I will list all of the products that I used in the description box below. There are way too many to link or to tell you in a voiceover, so I'll just go ahead and link them for you. And once I've got those mixed up and that coat of epoxy on my tumbler, I'm just going to take a gloved finger and kind of paint on these micas in the same direction that my glitter is going. So we're angling it to the bottom left, and I'm going in kind of heavy-handed with this first color because it's like a pure white color. I know I'm going to add more of that because I don't want to pull away from the look of the glitters. So I'm going to use more plain white and then just kind of accentuate it with the colored whites that have the shifty chrome peacock look. I don't even know what they're called. And then kind of add to it. So we just don't want to pull away from the glitter, and we also don't want to take from the flowers. So we're going to go ahead and lay these down, and I will tell you guys that the pink that I added at the end, I wanted to be very, very subtle. So I saved that for last because I wanted to kind of tie that in with the pink florals. I wanted them to be copacetic and just kind of match and flow well. And so I saved that for very last, but it was very light. But I felt like it needed to be there just to make sense of the design. So I went ahead and applied that last, and I was pretty light-handed with the luster dust as well, the silver. I just wanted to accent the silver that I put down in the glitters to tie that together, but it does easily take over. So if you are using those 2 colors, I would just give you a heads up and let you know to be very cautious, very light-handed. You can always add more, but you can't really take away. I guess you can, but not without compromising the rest of the micas. So I will let this play through and stop yakking, and I will see you guys in the next step. Here's a close-up. I know it's hard to see from far away all of the shiftiness of the micas, but here's a close-up of all of the colors I just laid down. And when you're torching it, you just want to be very cautious not to over-torch it and cause the epoxy to swirl. Things end up muddled together, and it just is not a good look. Once that epoxy cured, I went along the top and bottom rims with my sanding block just to buff away any pokey bits that we had sticking out. And then I'm going to take these dried florals that I got on Amazon. They come in a variety pack. I got some greenery, some yellows, oranges, pinks, purples, and whites. And there was plenty here. You probably could get like, I would say maybe like 2, possibly 3 tumblers out of these packs for probably about $15. So well worth the value, but you need to be very careful when you're handling them because they are very, very fragile. So I would recommend using tweezers to pull them out. And then we're going to go ahead and once we've got the florals set aside that we're going to use, we're going to start with the biggest first. So the same concept with the glitter, using our chunkiest first, we're going to use our biggest florals first, and then we're going to kind of fit the other florals around the greenery. So because this fern is our largest, I'm going to go ahead and lay that down with some UV epoxy. I'm just going to take a gloved finger and smooth the epoxy out in the area that I'm going to lay it down, and then very gently lay that down into the epoxy and then add more on top of that. I am curing these first few pieces as I go instead of laying them down and doing a kind of bulk cure, if that makes sense, just because they tend to lift. So anything with like a super pokey stem is going to lift very easily, and so you have to kind of manhandle them and baby them, I guess, at the same time. So I'm gonna lay them down, and then you'll see in a couple of these where I take my tweezers and where I take my little rubber stir stick and I hold the stem down while I'm curing it, and just constantly picking up and putting down either the tweezers or the little stir stick here, because I don't want it to stick to the cup, but also I want to make sure that the stems are not going to stick up under that epoxy and cause sharp epoxy and cause extra coats of epoxy. So it's a delicate balance, but you'll kind of get the hang of it. It's pretty easy once you are kind of in the moment doing it, but just something to be cautious of. So I'm just putting a little dab of UV epoxy, curing the stem first so I know that that is in place, it's not going to move, and then we'll go ahead and lay the stems of the flowers down and the flowers themselves. So again, working biggest to smallest, this was my next biggest floral. I'm going to get that in place, work that around the ferns that I've got laid down here, and then we can go in with our smaller pieces and lay those down where we see fit. The only thing that I really paid attention to other than that was to make sure that the coordinating colors weren't too close together. So I didn't want too many pinks together, too many purples, too many yellows, whatever the case may be. And I didn't, with this one, follow the lines of the micas. I just kind of fit them where they needed to go. It worked well. I don't think it looks out of place. So play with it however you want to play with it and however it fits on your design. And I will let you guys watch the rest of this and kind of see how I laid these down. This is very sped up because it took me forever to lay these down, so just ignore it if it looks choppy. Once each individual flower is under the epoxy, we're going to take the UV epoxy and just cover the entire tumbler with it. This is just going to make sure everything is adhered properly to the tumbler, that when we go in with our regular coats of epoxy, there will be no surprises, that there's not going to be any epoxy that somehow seeps under like a leaf and lifts it up and causes a bump or anything like that. So we're just basically doing our due diligence, making sure everything is in place. We're going to quickly cure this after we torch it, and then we're going to go ahead and finish this up with the rest of the epoxy. After that UV epoxy fully cured, I went in with my sanding block and just buffed down any pokey bits that were standing up. You don't want to buff it too hard. Keep in mind, UV epoxy is very thin. It's very easy to scuff it a little bit too much and scratch the flowers, and they are very fragile. I cannot stress that enough. They're very, very fragile. So there's no undoing it if you sand too far down. So just be very cautious if you're doing that. And then I'm going to go in with about 30 milliliters of the Flynn Sisters regular setting epoxy. Now in this step, I am going to go in with some extra glitter. I did a milk bath tumbler probably like 5 years ago or so. And I wish I would have added glitter on top of the milky look, not actually milk. So I added it in here, and you can't really tell in the tutorial, but in person, it made a huge difference in the end result of the entire look of the tumbler. So I would recommend doing this, keeping in mind less is more here. You don't want to overwhelm it. We already have a lot going on, so we just want to accentuate what we've got going on. So just a little bit of Galadriel, I don't even know how to say that, from Peachy Olive, and then just a little bit of Lassie, and I just used the extra epoxy that I had on hand from this coat to mix it in. I mixed up way too much glitter and epoxy here. I probably could have just used this in a mold or something, so you don't need much. But I'm basically just filling in the negative spaces like I did in last weekend's tutorial. Negative spaces meaning where the flowers are not. And then I just kind of pushed it a little bit into the florals. I didn't want to cover up all those flowers or anything like that, but I didn't want to look like I was excluding them. And so I just gave it a little bit of something there to help tie it in, so it didn't look like an outside element or anything like that. And I love how it turned out, so I would definitely recommend doing that. And if you're looking for a tutorial on how to do a milk bath tumbler, basically it's this exact same concept. You don't have to do the glitter and the mica, but if you put the flowers on in the same concept we just did, and then you're going to take some epoxy and mix a little bit of white epoxy dye into it, just a very tiny bit. You don't want it super pigmented, you want it very sheer, like it would be milk. I don't know how to do the true like milk bath tumblers with the actual like breast milk, so don't ask me how to do that. But if you want to kind of do a mock-up version of that, just use white epoxy dye and just kind of add a drop here and a drop there until you see fit. Add it over top of your florals and it will give it that milky look. So after we've got the glitter addition added on here, I'm just going to do a quick torch on this tumbler. Just like the micas, we don't want this glitter to move a lot, so holding back on the heat is going to help prevent that. We're going to let that cure overnight, do one more small sand, and then a final coat of epoxy, and this tumbler is completely finished. I love how this turned out. This was a custom order, and she just kind of let me go with it however I wanted to do it, and just told me which flowers she wanted, and I love how it turned out. So let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that bell button for notifications on future tutorials. And if you replicate this design, don't forget to tag me. I would love to see what you do with this concept. I will see you guys next weekend.